Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance, the podcast where we serve up bite-sized pieces of financial advice to simplify your money and your life. Join your hosts, David Shotwell and Nick Nauta, and let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Table Finance Podcast. I am flying solo today, no partner in crime, Mr. Shotwell, but I do have a special guest today. Miss Kim Barber from Globetrotter Travel is back by popular demand, talking about all things travel now that we're in the midst of the summer travel season, right, Kim?
Absolutely.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the travel business.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I went to school for tourism and hospitality and at Central Michigan University and knew that I wanted to work in travel and tourism. Didn't necessarily see that as a travel advisor, but went overseas and did some internships working for tour companies in New Zealand and Australia and really loved the experience. But ultimately, it made me realize I wanted to be closer to home and closer to family. And a lot of tourism jobs at that time in Michigan were hard to come by because they were seasonal, and there was not a lot of remote work back in the day when I graduated. Anyways, I started working at a storefront travel agency and learned the business. And after doing that for a little bit, decided to kind of launch off on my own. And I've not looked back. 11 years later, here we are.
Awesome. Love it.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite part about helping clients plan trips?
Yeah, I love to see the photos after their trips or during their trips. I love to get those messages. This has been the best tour that we've done, or this is the best day. For a lot of the trips that I plan, I mean, I do a little bit of everything. I do kind of warm weather getaways and trips that are more closer to home or just kind of a typical trip, but I do a lot of once in a lifetime kind of bucket list trips as well. And those are the ones I get really excited about. For myself, I thought that African safari would be a once in a lifetime trip for me when I went for the first time in 2019, and turns out it wasn't. It gave me the travel bug all over again. So I love kind of recreating those trips and seeing those once in a lifetime bucket list adventures come together.
Yeah. Speaking of once in a lifetime bucket list trips, we do a lot of retirement planning around here, and one of the big things is retirement travel.
Sure.
And often comes with like a bucket list of here's the things that I want to see in my retirement while I still can. So, can you tell us a little bit about, is there a difference in planning travel when you're retired versus younger? Like, what are some of the things that come up as people are planning for retirement travel?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing I see is that retirees certainly have more time to work with,
Yeah.
which is nice all around, especially if we are talking about bucket list trips. Like I know Australia and New Zealand, it's an area that I specialize in. It is a destination that is on a lot of people's bucket lists, but it's a long trip,
Yeah.
and it's not an inexpensive flight. So I think that I do plan it for people who are not retired frequently, but typically they max out at about 2 weeks, which is not, it's a good amount of time, obviously for Americans. That's kind of our standard, but it's not a lot when it comes to seeing the majority of two countries. So
Sure.
I think that when people are retired and they've got that time off to really kind of play with, it makes it a lot more comfortable. The trip isn't as rushed. And, that way, rather than doing New Zealand, on one trip and Australia on another trip, for example, you're only paying that long haul airfare once, and you've got a little more time to work in the trip. So I think time is the biggest piece of it. Generally speaking, obviously retirees have a little bit more of a budget to work with as well than some
Sure.
of the, younger couples, honeymoon couples and things that I work with. So I think that I just see a lot more time and a lot more of those bucket list trips being requested rather than kind of a typical, Mexico, Caribbean getaway or something like that for someone who maybe has a shorter amount of time to work with.
Yeah. Is it helpful when you retire to like travel off peak? Do you see a lot of people doing that in terms of not going in the busy season because that's when you have to travel?
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, certainly, I recognize people with young kids, they're at the mercy of the school schedules and have to go during peak times. But yes, I always recommend if you have flexibility, particularly, If you're going to Europe, you can go in May or you can go in September and October. You will pay less, you will have fewer crowds, and hopefully you won't have such hot weather as well, because
Yeah.
it can get pretty hot. I always recommend, if people are flexible, to try to go for those kind of shoulder seasons, where it's kind of a better experience all around.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see retirees make when planning travel?
I think the biggest thing is, I mean, and of course, hindsight's 2020, but I think the biggest thing is people just kind of waiting too long to do some of their like biggest bucket list kind of trips. We can't predict what's going to happen, but mobility challenges come up
Yeah.
sometimes later in life, and sometimes the trip that we've dreamed about for a really long time, by the time we wait for whatever reason, financial or time or both, we wait and we finally get around to doing it. Maybe our mobility is a little bit more limited, or something like that. So I think the main thing is, just don't put it off. Don't wait too long. I mean, obviously you've got to be in the place where you've got the time and the money to commit to it. But a lot of the times people wait, and then I have a story from a client who was on her husband's retirement dream trip, which was an Alaskan cruise tour last summer, and they did the tour portion before the cruise. So I think 6 or 7 days of the tour on land, and then they were going to board the ship. And by the time they got to the portion where they boarded the ship, there were about 6 people on their cruise tour who could no longer do the cruise, because
Wow.
the land portion, I mean, it wasn't a high endurance kind of trip. It didn't have a high physical rating, but just because of some health stuff, and some being a little bit older and having some mobility challenges, there were 6 people who didn't actually make it on the cruise portion. I think the main thing is just don't put it off too long.
Yeah. No, I heard this great stat the other day that at 65, when most people retire on average, you got about 12 good years left where you, on average, are in good physical shape, but also just have like the energy to do that kind of stuff. And, that's a very short window if you think about it.
It is. I've heard that too. So and I've had some of my clients say that to me too. I've got about 10 good years left, so we're
Yeah.
packing it in now. So I think that, obviously for some of those bucket list things, like, you do have to wait for retirement, but
Mhm.
anything that's maybe, a little bit still on your bucket list, but maybe not as big of a trip, maybe not Australia, New Zealand, or in my case, Antarctica. Maybe don't wait and try to fit
Right.
it in beforehand when you've still got your health.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit about budgeting, because this is always a big one that comes up, especially for retirees and travel.
Sure.
Where do you kind of start thinking about a realistic budget for travel? It's one of our top goals that people have, but nobody really knows what kind of number to put on there in terms of like
Sure.
how much should you do, how much, and obviously I'm sure you can spend as much as you want. I'm sure that
Right.
part's pretty easy.
Right.
But do you have some tips around like if someone is going to take a big trip a year and a small trip, something along those lines, like how much you should think about in terms of travel budget?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Like you said, I think ultimately it comes down to preferences too, right? I mean, I've always considered myself to be relatively thrifty, but as I get a little bit older and I get some travel experiences under my belt, I've changed that to say that I really appreciate a good value. I have a lot of retiree clients who do maybe book 2 or 3 trips a year. And I guess on average, maybe they're spending 30,000 a year for one bigger trip, one smaller trip. There is a trip that I plan pretty frequently, which is an African safari, and that is a bigger ticket trip than your
Hmm.
average trip. There's a lot that goes into the cost of the safari. So, that's generally a bit more of a splurge, but if it's kind of a more of a, I don't want to say typical, but I guess more of a, an ocean cruise or a river cruise, those are a bit less than an African safari. So I think in retirement, maybe 25 or 30,000 a year is a pretty typical budget that I see for two trips. Of course, then there's people that do plan a big retirement trip. That's a big ticket trip. That's going to be double that or triple that right off the bat when they
Sure.
retire. But then as they kind of get into their retirement years, they're spacing those out a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Are there costs that travelers like what are the surprise costs that maybe people aren't thinking of?
Depending on the destination, there are, and it's always evolving, but there are some visa costs that come up. I mean, those aren't significant usually, $100 here or there, but on top of all of your other travel expenses, they sometimes can be a surprise. Another thing that comes up is if you're going to some popular tour travel destinations, like Hawaii is a good example. A lot of the properties, resorts, hotels in Hawaii have a resort fee, which admittedly in the travel industry, we all kind of hate. We all think they should just work it into the price and call it that. But those are fees that you pay directly on site. And generally, they say their inclusions are things like daily programming, beach chairs. If you're somewhere where, it's a public beach, but they've got chairs on the beach right out in front of their property. And then in Hawaii, something they will often do in that resort fee is include some cultural activities. They'll have like somebody teaching ukulele or something on site. I mean, I always disclose those fees up front, but that can just be one of those things that people kind of forget about, especially if they're planning like 9 months in advance and then, they think it's all taken care of and then they get to their trip and you do pay that fee right when you arrive. So those are kind of some of the, I guess, unexpected ones or the ones that kind of come up, but not every destination certainly requires you to have a visa that you have to pay extra for. It's just kind of certain Asian destinations. Maybe in the next year or two, we might have to do something for a lot of countries in Europe, but it's a pretty nominal fee.
Nice. Are there destinations that have a pretty good value right now? Like, is there a big swing in prices for certain places? I mean, I assume there's places that you don't want to go that are a good value, but
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I always feel repetitive when I say it, but I mean, Mexico and the Caribbean is our money goes pretty far there.
yeah,
Mexico in particular, you get a lot of bang for your buck. There's all-inclusive resorts and also resorts that are not all-inclusive, but particularly like the Cancun Riviera Maya area, there's so many hotels and resorts in a pretty small geographic area that the prices are pretty competitive. And like from our market in Michigan, we have, of course, seasonal nonstop flights from the Lansing airport that go to Cancun, which are priced very well. And then when we're not in that winter season where they're going nonstop out of Lansing, there are daily nonstop flights out of Detroit to Cancun as well. So that is always a really good value. I guess thinking a little bit beyond that, again, as we get into those shoulder seasons, and a lot of times people don't really even think about this either, obviously, depending on their work and kids' school schedules and things like that. But like a few years ago, I did London in January, and I don't think a lot of people would think about that. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't nearly as cold as Michigan in January. And I mean, I walked right up to the gates of Buckingham Palace, which in July is impossible to do. I think going in the off season is always a good way to, have your money stretch a little bit further. But I guess as far as destinations, Iceland has been really popular for a number of years. And I think that it's kind of starting to trend downward a little bit. So I'm seeing pretty good value in Iceland. Portugal has been a really good value. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely good options out there for destinations that are still a really good value, particularly when we're not looking at peak season travel.
yeah. Okay. Is there a difference, do you feel, between taking smaller trips or taking one big trip, especially if you're thinking internationally? Like, how do you parse that out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, I think for a lot of people comes down to their time off, right?
Yeah.
But for me, I've always sort of been of the mindset, the airfare is going to be, I mean, it is what it is. That's just a non-negotiable. If you're going international, you're most likely flying. You can take some transatlantic or trans-Pacific cruises, but most of the time, because of time constraints, people are
Yeah.
flying. So that's just kind of the non-negotiable. It is what it is. So I always say, if you're going to pay that big international airfare, like go for as long as you can. But that being said, I recognize I've got 2 young kids now. We've got to pick and choose when we can get away. And so if you are going to do, if you've got 4 long weekends a year or something, doing something a little bit closer to home that's more affordable, like Mexico or a Caribbean cruise or something like that, to still kind of have a getaway, but obviously manage your time off. But I think if you've got the time, if you've got a chunk of time, it makes sense, especially if you're going to Europe where it's so easy to get around and get from one destination to another. Pay that big airfare once and then go for as long as you can.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. When you're planning some of these trips, how far in advance do you start the planning process? Like, when's a
Yes.
good time frame for that?
I guess logistically, you can't book flights prior to 11 months prior to travel. So
Okay.
technically, it's 331 days. So 11 months is really when we can book a full package with flights. But that being said, some trips I do recommend starting to plan further out than that, especially something like, for example, African safari, because a lot of people do get a little bit of sticker shock when we start putting together an African safari. So, they might want to have a couple years to start making payments on that. Another example of that would be Antarctica. I have a group booked for Antarctica in March of 2028. So we've started planning it early so we can make payments, and the cost of that trip isn't going to be so painful all at once. But for a typical trip, kind of your average Mexico all-inclusive getaway or a Caribbean cruise or something like that, the majority of my clients are planning those maybe 6 to 9 months out. You can certainly plan a lot of cruises up to 2 years in advance, but most people, I guess the average is about 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Speaking of cruises, they seem to be growing in popularity. Do you know can you give us some insights into why retirees like cruises so much?
Yeah, I think cruises are a really good value. It's funny because there's people that are just diehard cruisers. They're going to cruise.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to do anything else. That's all I have clients who book 4 or 5 cruises a year. That's all they do. I love that. I mean, I really enjoy cruising myself. And I think there's so much appeal having traveled in a lot of different ways. You get on a cruise ship, you unpack, and your hotel moves with you,
Yeah.
which is really nice from a logistical standpoint. I've also been in Europe where you're 2 nights here, 1 night here, 2 night there, and you're just constantly packing and unpacking, and just feel like all you're doing is lugging your suitcase around. So I think there's some real appeal that to only unpacking once. It's a good value. Your hotel, your transportation, your meals, your entertainment, all of that is included in this one price. Now, of course, there are always going to be opportunities to pay for extra specialty dining or beverages on board. But, I think a lot of people find it is a really good value, especially like Caribbean. There's always Caribbean cruises going year round, and they, of course, there's a number of different products, right? There's Carnival cruises, and then there's Viking, and there's a vast difference in the product and the price of
Mm-hmm.
those. But I think they just overall are a really good value and a convenient way to travel where people don't have to think a whole lot. You just kind of get on board, and somebody else deals with the transportation, and you just kind of get to enjoy yourself.
Yeah. What about people who shouldn't take a cruise?
Good question. I get this a lot, and I very often hear from people who are in a relationship, and it's like one person really wants to go or really wants to try one, and the other person has no interest at all. And I always share that I'm surprised that my husband likes cruising, because he's not necessarily, I don't know if he's going to like me saying this, but he's not necessarily like the biggest people person.
Sure.
And there are other people on cruise ships.
Yeah.
But I always say that cruises kind of make us more fun, because when we're not traveling on a cruise, we kind of travel like older retired people. Maybe we go to bed earlier, we wake up earlier. We kind of
Yeah.
make the most of our daylight hours, and
Yeah.
but then we go to bed early. And when we're on cruises, because there's all this entertainment and things kind of built in, we stay out and we do stuff. But I think obviously, if you are prone to any amount of motion sickness or seasickness, not to say that you shouldn't go on a cruise, because there are a lot of types of cruises and a lot of different size ships where you don't necessarily feel that. And I can say that easily because I'm not someone who is prone to seasickness, but I cruise enough that I see a lot of people with the wristbands and the patches and all of the things. So I know there are ways around that, but I think that and there's also, I always say this, there's a cruise for everybody. There's a product out there for everybody. So of course there's, the Royal Caribbean ships that hold 5,000 plus people. That's maybe not my ideal cruise, but I think a lot of people really enjoy those. And then of course I've been very spoiled in recent years. And my most recent cruise last week, I got home from Alaska and I was on a ship with 700 people. And that for me is a much more enjoyable experience than the 5,000 people.
Yeah.
I think, if you're just really adamant about not wanting to be stuck in a space with other people, a cruise maybe isn't for you. But I do always encourage people, give it a try. Maybe start with a 3 night one out of Miami, and
Sure.
and see how you feel about it. I hear from a lot of people that they've done one and they're going to write them off forever because the first one wasn't great. Well, for a lot of people, their first cruise is Carnival, and that isn't always the best experience. I think if you're prone to seasickness, maybe it's worth having a conversation to kind of determine which ship and which size might be the best option. But of course, there's a number of other ways to travel. You certainly don't have to cruise, but it is a nice way to travel, and a lot of people go once and then they kind of get hooked. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Is there a good time of year as far as value goes to take a cruise? What's like the timing of cruise
Yeah,
season?
that's a great. Yeah, I mean, there is, if we can avoid spring break and Christmas break time, that's going to be the best. Those are the
Yeah.
two most expensive times of year, which of course a lot of parents are only available to travel with their kids at those times of year. Yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows. Like, the summer months, Caribbean cruising isn't as popular because, of course, a lot of us who get away in the winter months are enjoying our home states in the summer. If you cruise in June, July, and August, the value in the Caribbean, at least, the value is pretty good. And then if we're talking about, going to Europe and doing a river cruise, for example, again, if you can avoid those peak seasons of or those peak months of June, July, August, and kind of go in April, May, September, October, you get a better value overall. And a lot of the times the river cruise companies will do like promotions for those kind of slower months where they do, free airfare or reduced airfare or something like that. So you can get a really good value. Kind of April, May, September, October, while still having pretty good weather overall.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of international travel, is there a
Mhm.
destination you think every retiree should try or look into?
What a good question. I mean, personally, African safari just absolutely
Yeah.
changed my life. Obviously, Africa is a continent, so that is a huge destination. I've done a number of countries. I guess my favorite overall safari experiences have been in Kenya and
Mhm.
also in South Africa and Zimbabwe. So, I mean, I just think African safari is worth it if you like wildlife, and I know it is on a lot of people's bucket list. So,
Sure.
if it's something you've considered, I think it is definitely a worthwhile trip. I have a few clients who have gone with me. I've escorted a few groups to Africa over the years now, and for a lot of people who also thought it would be a once in a lifetime trip, have now gone for their second time. Some of them are now planning their third trip with me next year. So I think, not to say that everybody will go once and then we'll keep going, because I realize that's not everybody's situation. But yeah, I think a lot of people realize how much more they enjoy it than they kind of anticipate. And so they end up wanting to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Definitely on my bucket list someday.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I want to do it with like I mean, not that I'm like a hobby photographer, but I think it'd be really fun to do one safari with like a photographer who actually knows what
Oh,
they're doing,
yeah.
because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah.
Are there international destinations that might be easier than people expect? Like, if you wanted to kind of dip your toes in the water, where would you start?
Not to sound like a broken record, but Mexico and Caribbean are very easy, particularly if you are going from the Lansing area in the winter months. Those nonstop flights out of Lansing that go to Cancun, Punta Cana, and next year Cabo again for the second year. Those are very easy and convenient. And then coming back into Lansing and doing customs in Lansing on return is so easy. So that is a really good international kind of starting trip, I think, for people. Some other destinations internationally that are really easy for us, kind of from Midwest area, to get to Ireland and to get to Iceland. The flights are really pretty quick and easy. We have nonstop flights to Dublin. We have nonstop flights to Reykjavik from Detroit. So those are both kind of good, I say, starter Europe trips for a lot of people, because the flight is shorter. It's really only about 6 hours, give or take, for both of those if you do like a nonstop flight from Detroit. And yeah, I mean, it's because it's a shorter flight, you can get away with doing a shorter trip. If you only have 4 or 5 nights, you can easily spend 4 or 5 nights in Dublin, or two cities in, Dublin, and then go over to Galway or something. So Ireland and Iceland, I think, are two of the easiest kind of international trips that aren't those warm weather Mexico Caribbean ones.
Sure. What are your tried and true trips for jet lag and jumping time zones?
Yes, I do as I say, not as I do, because they always say when you land in Europe, stay. We leave at night, we fly overnight, we get there in the morning. and they say, stay up and make,
Yeah.
get adjusted. I have done that. But more recently, I find myself napping
Yeah.
and then getting up. And honestly, I mean, it does kind of work for me. Like because I don't sleep very well on planes at all. So,
Mhm.
if I've been up all night, I get there, I'll set an alarm, maybe a 2-hour alarm, just get a little bit of sleep so I can get out, go do something, and then kind of come back and go to bed early and start to get adjusted. So that does work well for me, but I know a lot of people that does not work for. So,
Yeah.
most of the experts say get there and just push yourself, stay awake.
Sure.
I just don't function very well on no sleep. But yeah, I know there's all these, products out there that are supposed to help with jet lag, and I haven't tried a lot of them. Yeah, I mean, I think just do your best to stay awake as long as you
Yeah.
can. Or if you are like me and you think I do need a little bit of a cat nap just to kind of power through the day, you got to figure out what works for you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about group travel
Okay.
because it seems to be a little bit more popular, especially with our retirees of, hey, we want to take a multi-generational trip. We want to bring the kids, the grandkids, and do
Sure.
one big thing.
Right.
What kind of things should people look out for? How do you make those trips successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, there's a couple different types of group trips. Obviously, multi-generational family travel is one that I am seeing a lot, especially since 2020. I think a lot of people, I don't know, we thought, oh, we'll be able to do that, right? And then the whole world
Right.
shut down, and people just don't want to put those things off anymore. So I have been booking actually a lot of those where grandma and grandpa are paying and taking the
Mm-hmm.
kids and the grandkids. And so a very common one, again, because it's easy and it's kind of just a laid back trip, is that they will go to the Caribbean or Mexico and stay at a resort and kind
Yeah.
of have a lot of together time, but still have the option to do activities and excursions and things like that. Another really popular and easy way to do a group trip, a multi-generational family trip, or any group really for that matter, would be an ocean cruise, because the itinerary is set. There's really not a whole lot of debate about what we're going to do when. You're going to be in port for these times, but it's an easy way to travel as a group and have a lot of spaces where you can be together and gather. So those are both really popular. I also work with like a lot of groups that are established. So I work with an alumni association, and they do a couple
Okay.
trips every year. And those trips, we vary. Sometimes we do ocean cruises, sometimes we do river cruises. They've done land tours. So just kind of depending on the destinations that people express interest in. But I think the main thing that is worth noting when it comes to group trips, and it does always depend on the size of the group, but very often, whoever the group leader is, the person who is the organizer or the person who is paying for it, if you meet the minimum requirements for the number of rooms or the number of people, there's very often good perks in it for the group leader. Sometimes that means that you earn like a rebate.
Yeah.
They'll often call it free. I never call it free because it isn't free. You still are
Yeah.
paying for a portion of your trip, but you'll earn a rebate kind of based on the average of all of the other rooms that have booked. So that's always nice for the group leader. If you meet those minimum requirements, if you're on a cruise line, they'll usually give you onboard credit. They'll
Yeah.
let you kind of have a set group dinner, things like that. There's a lot of perks that can come with group travel, particularly for the person or the people who are organizing it.
Yeah, I'm interested in. So, if you're a couple or a solo and you're looking for a group that likes to travel, like you mentioned, alumni association, but is there other
Hmm.
like travel groups if you don't necessarily have your own friends that want to travel and you want to get
Sure.
involved and meet some people that like to travel and do that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. I find that a lot of, well, I mean, I guess shameless plug here. We do escort a couple groups every year, typically three on average. So you can always reach out and we can share
Yeah,
more about the group trips that we are leading. Additionally, if you're not in a group or you don't have a friends group that is doing that, I find that a lot of my clients go on a trip. They might go as a couple on a guided tour or on a river cruise, and they meet friends who are
yeah,
like-minded travelers in a similar life season, and then they end up coming back and booking trips together. But there are certainly, yeah, there's always guided tours. For example, guided tours are a good option in a lot of places. For a lot of people will do a guided tour in Asia, in China, or in Japan, because they're maybe a little bit uncomfortable traveling independently because of language barriers and things like that. And so there are always companies that have set departure dates on guided tours. So that can be another way where if it is just two people, but they want to maybe travel with others or join some other people, you can book onto a guided tour where other people will be booked on as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And for our solos out there, is there good like solo travel groups?
Yes, there are. I mean, anybody who is a solo or a single traveler has experienced over the year. And I will say I've experienced this a lot as well, because although I have a husband who does like to travel, his time off is a lot more limited. So I very often end up traveling solo as well. And the travel world can be mean to solo travelers because, of course, in a lot of cases, you end up paying a single supplement. You know, of course, the cruise line or the resort would always rather have two people paying than only one person. So you pay a supplement. But very often they will do promotions where they will waive single supplements or they will cut them back. There's a number of guided tour companies that will also do like single only departures. So you know you're just joining a group of other solo travelers. There are some tour companies out there as well who will match up solo travelers together, which can be difficult. But there are companies out there that do it. There are a lot of options. And the other thing that I find works really well for solo travelers, if they're interested in it, is cruising, either ocean or river, because, you can very often on the bigger ocean cruise ships, they will have like single traveler meetups. So you can have the opportunity to meet up with other people. And then, of course, very often you have the opportunity to join other people like at dinner if you want to not sit alone and join some other people. And that's a good way to kind of still travel solo, but have the opportunity to interact with other people too.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great advice. A question I get fairly often is travel insurance. Do I need it? Is it worth it? What does it cover? And you hear all the horror stories of, grandma broke her knee and had to get, helivaced home or whatever it is. And obviously that's very expensive if you don't have insurance. So you kind of walk us through some guidelines maybe for travel insurance and what to look for?
Yeah, I definitely always recommend it, especially for international trips. I think a lot of people don't realize it, especially if they're newer to international travel. But for 99% of us, I will say our medical insurance does not cover us overseas. There are a few anomalies out there that do have international coverage, but most of us don't. And so the main reasons that I would recommend travel insurance, especially for international travel, would be for trip cancellation and for any medical emergencies that might happen overseas. And of course, we hope neither of those things happen. But when it comes to travel, there's very often a lot that is outside of our control. And I have, I guess, obviously I work in travel, so I kind of hear the worst of the worst. And I personally have been on a number of cruises in particular that stand out in my head where I have seen people airlifted off of a cruise ship because of a medical emergency. So yes, that is a very expensive bill that you do not want to get if you do not have travel insurance. So I think that I've just seen enough of that I personally will not leave the country without insurance. And fortunately, I've never needed to use the medical emergency piece for myself, but I have had a lot of clients who have had needed to use it over the years. And some emergencies are, more minor than others. I lead a women's trip every year, and we were in Mexico earlier this year, and one of my friends who was on the trip just kind of stepped off a sidewalk funny and ended up, I actually don't remember her full diagnosis. I think she fractured her ankle. And so this was about halfway through the trip. So she slept on it overnight. And the next day she was like, I need to go somewhere. Yeah. So she ended up going to the emergency. Well, there was a doctor at the resort who looked at it and said, I think you need to go have an x-ray. And so she went to the hospital and did all of that. And, but she had travel insurance. So all of those bills and everything she submitted, the out-of-pocket cost was very minimal for her. So those are the main reasons I recommend it: cancellation and for medical emergencies that could come up. There are a lot of other really nice built-in coverages as well. If your flight is delayed, if your baggage is lost, there's a lot of other kind of standard stuff that comes on travel insurance policy. And I have had to file some of those claims over the years that have saved me a lot of money. One time I was leading a small group on a trip to, we were going to Buenos Aires, but we were going to Rio de Janeiro, but we stopped in Buenos Aires on the way. Our path to get there we had two stops, and we were en route to Buenos Aires. We had that was going to be our last leg from Buenos Aires to Rio de Janeiro. And while we were in flight, our airline went on strike. So when we landed in Buenos Aires, anyway, to keep the version short, we landed, our airline had gone on strike. We didn't realize that right away until a few hours later when our flight was supposed to be leaving for Rio. And then it became clear that it was not happening. The airline had gone on strike. And so we all had travel insurance. So, of course, I was calling the travel insurance and we all managed to get rebooked on the next flight, a few hours later to Rio. And it was all paid for. Whereas had we done that at the last minute without travel insurance, A, there's no way we would have all gotten on the same flight. And B, a last minute plane ticket internationally is never an inexpensive thing. We probably would have each been out about $1,500 at that point. It's just, there's a lot of built-in coverage that is definitely worthwhile for the peace of mind.
Yeah. Are there companies that you recommend that do a good job with that?
Yeah, I work with a number of companies, and I will say that it kind of varies depending on. I mean, like any insurance, right? There's you can get the base level package, you can get the top tier, and anything in between. There are certain companies that I find as people age, because of course, as we age, premium on our insurance policies starts to go up. So one that I think is really good for maybe older retirees is called Travel Insured International. I work with them a lot. They have really competitive coverage. But, of course, as you age, the premium goes up, but theirs is a bit more competitive than some of the other ones that I've worked with for maybe some younger travelers. Travel Guard is a good one that I've worked with for younger travelers as well. Allianz is a really good one. So there's a number of great companies out there, and I'm always happy to compare quotes for people and they can kind of look at the coverage on different policies. But Travel Insured International, I think, is among the best value for maybe a older retired traveler.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's super helpful. Last but not least, what when it comes to travel and technology, do you have certain apps or things that you recommend, especially if you're going international?
Absolutely. And I did jot down a few notes because I didn't want to forget them. WhatsApp is one that I always recommend. This is an app that is a communication app. You can call through it on Wi-Fi. You can text through it. It is very commonly used internationally in a lot of other countries. Of course, I can't find my notes on this question, but a lot of other countries, they kind of default to using WhatsApp rather than like messaging like we would use because it's a more affordable option for them internationally. So having WhatsApp helps a lot, especially if you don't want to, depending on your phone plan overseas, what your coverage might be. You can just connect to Wi-Fi and make calls over WhatsApp. You can also, if you've got like a tour or a tour leader or like a tour guide that you're trying to reconnect with, or reconfirm a pickup time or something like that, you can just send a text in WhatsApp, and it's very frequently used overseas. So that is a good one to have. I always recommend downloading the airline app for whatever airline or airlines you might be flying, because leading up to a trip, I personally find it easier to manage the flight details on a browser, on a web browser. But when you're traveling, it's really nice to have the app. So definitely the airline apps. If you're cruising, same thing, the cruise line app. But then more generically, Google Translate has saved my life so many times. Google Maps and having offline, maps if you're traveling and you don't have data or you don't have Wi-Fi. Those are all really, really helpful. And then the other one, and I don't have a specific, well, I do. I use one called XE. It's just a currency conversion app. So when you are traveling overseas and you don't have the exchange rate memorized, you can just plug in, you're in a gift shop and you see that something is 10 euro. You can plug it in and see how much that is in US dollars. So those are some of my most commonly used ones.
I love it. Last question. If you could give someone who's about to retire one piece of travel advice, what would it be?
One piece of travel advice. So good. I mean, it's redundant, I guess, but don't wait. Don't put it off. I have heard from a lot of people who have waited and put things off and then have, got a diagnosis or their life situation has changed and they're not able to do these trips that they've always dreamed about. And so I think it's just if and of course, be practical. Talk to your financial advisor, obviously, make sure that, you're not spending money that you don't have. But I think that, if you've got the money and you've saved for it, and this is something that, that you want to do, this is the time to do it.
Yeah. Love it. So where can our listeners connect with you, reach out to you? How do we get in touch?
Absolutely. My website is myglobetrottertravel.com. There's an MY before the Globetrotter Travel. You can also email me, Kim Barber at myglobetrottertravel.com. You can call me. I've got my phone number listed on the website as well. And then we are also on Facebook and Instagram at My Globetrotter Travel. So we are not everywhere. We have not dabbled into TikTok yet, but we are almost everywhere. So
I love it. Well, I will make sure we put those in the show notes so our listeners can check those out if they want to get in touch. Kim, I feel like I could sit here and talk to you about travel all day, but unfortunately, I do have to get back to,
sure.
to doing some real things around the office. But this has been fantastic. I appreciate you coming back and hope to have you on again.
Thank you. Yeah, always happy to come. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.